kind of jump into this. So I kind of
Hey.
liked how we started where you slid into my DMs like 5 years ago because we met technically through a voice workshop, a conference, right? Through Savara.
Yeah. Yes, with Dr. Gupta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like I was like, "Ooh, somebody slid into my DMs for the
I
first
mean,
time for everything."
I
What?
actually had a glass of wine to calm my nerves. I had never done it before. And I was like, hey, would you tell me everything you know? Thanks. And you were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's hop on a call. And you could not have been sweeter. I was like, oh, okay.
And it was a
That,
start. It was a start of a fun, beautiful relationship where we don't see each other very often, but I do follow, and I love and adore you. So
same, same, same.
hopefully it will be more frequent rather than not. So we talked all voice nerd stuff, and as you know, I love voice nerdiness and
Yeah,
talking what
same.
all that's about. But musical theater and your journey has been kind of an interesting process from what I understand and like what we've talked about. Where are you at currently? Are you doing a show right now or?
So I finished doing Titanic, which is still running in New York, but I opened it at the Daryl Roth, and it was all Celine Dion songs. I don't know if people have seen it or heard of it, but it's as if Celine Dion was on the Titanic and she's the narrator, and it is just the most ridiculous. It's the best time ever. Like highly, highly, highly recommend. So I played Rose, and that was super fun, but I did it for 10 months, and it was the first time I was blending being a vocal coach and having my own vocal studio and also performing 8 times a week. And I found it to be very difficult.
Yeah.
And after 10 months, I was like, okay, I'm good for a second on the 8 shows a week and just kind of committing back to my studio. But there are a couple things in the air. I'm like, I've got my hands in a couple little pots. So it's just kind of a waiting game to see what ends up panning out. But yeah.
I find, because I was a performer too, I find it to be where it's a hard balance to still find that time to be on stage, especially when you're coaching. And I can tell when I start getting burned out or when I start kind of like going down this like path, I'm like, I have to get on the stage again because it
Yep.
reminds me of why I got into this field anyway, because I was first and foremost a performer. You know,
100%.
that's
But
like
I
the
also love teaching so much that it's now a part of my life that also didn't want to just be like just performing. It's really interesting. I'm finding the balance. I'm learning more about it. That was kind of the first test of implementing the two. I think I have a hard time of balancing. I'm like, I can do it all. It's fine, until I'm like the universe forces me to sit down. But yeah, it was difficult. It was challenging, but I also, I love the show, and I'm like you. I need to be performing from time to time, so
Yeah.
it kind of refilled that well a little bit. And then, like you also said, I knew when it was time. I think I've been in this industry long enough now to go, okay, and now I think I need a break, and now I think I need to do something else. So
What did you do like for strategy to get you through that? Because there's a lot of people that are in that same position. I mean, obviously, I'm sure some of your friends who are on Broadway teach and perform at the same time. So, were there strategies or coping skills, or how did you try and keep that life balance with coaching
yeah.
and keeping your voice healthy?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just no social life. I think that just went out the window. That was the first thing to go. And just getting as much sleep as possible. I didn't start teaching until like 11 o'clock or noon most days because the show is late. So I don't fall asleep quickly because all of my energy is expended at 8 p.m. And obviously no coaching on the weekends because we had 2 show days. And then I would take the Monday that we had off, completely off, no teaching, no singing, nothing. And I would almost, we call it rotting. I would just rot in bed.
Like
Full vocal rest. Yeah. I did feel like I'd been hit by a bus like every Monday, but by Tuesday we kind of got it back. And using my straws, of course. I was like religious. I had one backstage. So in between songs, I would run back and be like, woo! And then go right back on and do, the next Celine Dion song because my character didn't really leave the stage for 90 minutes straight.
Wow.
And sang in every single song. I played Rose, so she's
she's
kind
on
of a
there.
big part of Titanic. Yeah, it's kind of her story. So yeah, really just like trying to maintain and not get sick and not, if I felt vocally tired, I would take the night from the show, just not pushing myself too hard.
Yeah.
But
That makes sense. I find myself with that too, with touring, especially because people don't realize like you have normal life schedule and then you have show schedule. So like when I'm touring, I call it my artist schedule. And
Hmm.
it's so difficult to go out on the road. You're there, you can't really unwind till like 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's
Yep.
so hard for me on the hats to come from the road. And then all of a sudden I get home and then I'm on mom's schedule. And then I'm up at like 6 and like getting it out. And like that time zone like has messed up my,
Can't
time
even.
zones and then the artist schedule and that it just like the sleep
Yeah.
is a huge thing for me. So if I
Yeah.
can't regulate that, then I'm like done.
My fiance was like, when do I get to like see you and hang out with you, you know? And he was incredible throughout the whole process, but it took a lot of patience on his end. And, I was sort of just like, okay, at first it was only supposed to be 3 months that I was going to do Titanic. And then we kept getting extended. And then it was like building all this momentum. And, so yeah, he was very patient with me, but it was interesting for him to learn about because he's like we talked about earlier, he's a muggle. He's not of the wizarding world. He does not work in performing, so he had to really learn about like me on a performance schedule because he'd never experienced that before. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's just a different thing,
It's hard, yeah, it's hard finding that balance because they usually have like my husband too, 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 job, and your job kicks in at like from 3 to midnight. So you're like opposite schedules. So like just figuring out how to have the connection and the balance and
And
it's
like I'm just super cautious. I'm like, if a restaurant is loud, I'm sort of like, let's go somewhere else. I can't be screaming over music to like talk to people. It just really like makes me anxious actually.
yeah,
And I've got, little kind of clear earplugs that I wear whenever I'm out and about. So yeah, I'm just like, this is my moneymaker. I can't lose it. So I've got to just be really extra careful or be like, let's go outside and talk, stuff
yeah.
like that.
I
So
think that's smart. Okay, a
yeah.
question for you is in your training, so I'm going to
Mhm.
just read it here, but in your training, what were some of the things that were taught about your voice or singing or the entertainment world in the industry? And what, when you actually got into it, what didn't carry over?
Oh, interesting. Well, oh man.
And it may be nothing. Maybe you took a little piece of everything and formed it to fit the
Yeah.
situation. Or was there something where you were taught where you're like, yeah, that's not really how that works?
Well, it's interesting because I was an opera major at USC in the Thornton School of Music. And so a lot of that training is it's just a different part of it's different placements that you're singing in because that you're trying to get the acoustic value as opposed to having microphones. And I always say like musical theater is a stamina game. It's the 8 shows a week. It's being able to wake up every day and do the same show. Whereas with opera, you have days off in between, you don't have microphones. So you're trying to get a more acoustically large sound. And so it's just in a different spot. So I feel like I've trained a lot and that helped me tenfold in certain places. But then in others, it took a while for me to figure out a healthier placement for me with musical theater. Like I wasn't allowed to belt, in or use my chest voice really in school. And so when I got Rock of Ages 3 months out of college, it was like a lightning struck me on that day. Like truly, I was like, okay, trial by fire. I have 1 month to figure this out, and I don't know how to do it. And thankfully, I had a great coach who changed my thought process about where I was placing all that sound. And that's helped me now coach classical crossovers or people that are like, why am I, because if you're in the wrong spot and you're just pushing to try to get this belt effect or this like sound, it's just not in the right place. And so you're just going to hurt yourself and it's frustrating. And I
I,
feel like even with like Wicked, the hardest part of Wicked for me was because Wicked came after Rock of Ages. So at this point, I was very used to using my chest voice and kind of that rock effect.
yeah,
But then I also had my opera voice, so I was ready to do the "Let us make that whole thing. But the middle of No One Mourns the Wicked, where she's like, "And goodness knows the wicked's lives are lonely." It's like this whole part. It sounded like I was either chesting it, which sounded crazy,
okay.
or I was like, "Goodness knows." Like I could not find. It was right in that
You had
passaggio
to turn
place where I
around, yeah.
was like, I don't work here normally. So I had voice lessons with our musical director, who's now the conductor of Wicked on Broadway. I think every single week on just that section of the show until I like got it in the right spot. So I don't know if
So what
that
I'm
answers.
hearing is the coach helped you during the time of need when you were already in a professional setting.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's always a misunderstanding or a misconception, I think, a lot of times where people assume like, oh, you already got to this level and
Right.
why do you need a coach? Like you're already there. And I get it all the time. Like, I mean, currently I'm on tour with an artist
Right.
and they're like, why does this artist need a coach? And I'm like, why does the NBA need a coach? Like they're at the highest level, peak of the career, they're training. Why would they not need someone to help guide them through that? So
Right.
that's
And with musical theater, it's like you have to be a chameleon as opposed to even a pop artist who they're going to write the songs to fit their voices the best, right? And I'm sure a
well,
lot of
you would
do this.
think in theory.
Right, but also then they have to recreate it on the
Yeah.
road, whereas in a recording studio it's
Yeah.
very different. You can get away with a little bit more. But with musical theater, you have to be a chameleon. So, like the other day, I went in for a musical that was like folky, a folk feeling. And they're like, give us like this artist that's composing this musical. We want a song like in the style of their music. I didn't really have any folk cuts of anything, so it's sort of maneuvering my voice into that style. And then there's classical like Phantom of the Opera, or there's Kinky Boots, which was Cyndi Lauper. There's so many different avenues too, and you have to be able to sort of fit your voice into all of it. And I think coaches are so helpful for that, because a lot of the time you're like, "Ugh."
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing that I've talked about with people. And I actually, if you go to my website, there's like a list of questions. I just typed out a list of like 100 questions to ask your coach to see
Yeah,
what fits your needs for where it's at, because not every coach is right for that person.
100%.
And
That's why when
so,
people are like, "Oh, my coach or my school won't let me train with someone else," that always makes me a little nervous, just because I'm like, I think you should get all the opinions and figure out what feels right for you and go with your gut. And you should be with someone that you trust and that you feel confident with, because it's the most precious thing in the world. I mean, and I've definitely had coaches that I fully trusted and were incredible and have gotten me to where I am today. And then I've had coaches that I was sort of like, I just don't,
not a vibe.
made me feel like I wasn't a good singer, which is a strange thing. I'm like, if I had let that hold me back, I would not be where I am today. So, yeah.
I had a coach one time where I was like, it was like a really well-known coach, and I was going in for the first time. And, I put my own pressure, like my own expectation and like stress to get in front of this coach. And I sang actually something from Wicked
Huh.
and got done. And in my head, I was like, I was like, oh, okay, that actually went a lot better than I thought it was going to go,
Right.
like being nervous. And I got done and he sat back and he goes, wow, you sound just like Idina Menzel on that. And in my head, I was like, that's awesome because I love
Right.
her power. I love everything. And he goes, I didn't mean that as a compliment. And
Oh
I
my
immediately went
gosh.
like, "Nyah," down, and it like destroyed me. And then it was interesting because and the only reason I'm saying this, 3 years later, I saw him again and he's like, how come you never came back in for a lesson? And I'm like, what do you mean? Why'd I never come in for a lesson? I'm like, you
Right.
literally single-handedly destroyed me in that 30
Right.
minutes. I'm like, why would I come back to do that again? He goes, I thought it was one of the best lessons ever. Like, what are you talking about? I verbatimly said, this is how I perceived your message.
Yeah.
He started crying. And he was like, I'm so sorry that
Oh
that's
my
like what it
God. Well,
was. And
that's
I'm just,
still kind of nice.
and I was really brutal. And I literally said, I was like, I think you're the worst teacher I've ever had a lesson with. And I was
Wow.
like, you single-handedly destroyed me in 30 minutes. And I go, but the thing I walked out of there is I vowed to myself I would never do to somebody else what you just did to me.
100%.
I was like,
100.
so for that, I'm grateful for that lesson. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a teacher tell me I just wasn't funny in high school. And I took it for so long. I like took that internally and was like, oh, I guess my parents just like made me feel like I was funny, but I guess I'm not funny. And then now I've only played comedic roles on Broadway. And I'm like, if I had let that one opinion, but I'm the same. I don't think that that's productive or constructive. I
100%.
sort of like, no, I mean, I'm gonna give you constructive criticism and feedback, of course. I'm not just gonna
100%.
say two thumbs up, yay. There's always something to work on, but
The way you say it.
That doesn't make sense to me.
So
Yeah.
did they reach out for tickets to your show yet?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Are you kidding?
All right, all right. With roles like when you play Cherry and Rock of Ages, what are some of your day-to-day maintenance routines? Like, because it is physical and it is vocal demand, and
Right.
you truly never leave the stage. So did you have like what was your routine like just to prepare for that?
I mean, definitely a full vocal warm up, a full body warm up. Straws forever, always. I start with straw.
Yeah.
Yeah, just plug in the straw. SpawnCon. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I know.
Last time I didn't even know that I had a code. You were like, you get it together. I was like, I'm just buying this with my own money because I'm like obsessed with the product. But yeah, straw, I drink so much water. I make sure that I'm physical during the day, whether it's a workout class or I actually even have like a walking pad now and a stand-up keyboard. So sometimes I walk while I teach because when I was in the show run, if I was sitting all day and then just went and tried to do a 90-minute show, I was like, my body couldn't. I
Yeah.
needed to like kind of get things moving. Um, but yeah, a cool down, I guess. I'm just really smart with my vocal bandwidth. I call it my vocal bandwidth. And I just know myself so well now after like 10 years of 8 shows a week, where I go, okay, we're teetering. We've got, a 5-show weekend coming up. I need to shut it down. I'm like on vocal rest a lot. And it's just something that I'm used to now. I like to just have my quiet time. I try to pick and choose where I spend my vocal energy, right? Because what we do is kind of unnatural in a way, how much we're using our voice. And I've learned in my teaching to stop demonstrating the wrong way. That was a learning lesson. For a while I was like, no, this is what I'm hearing and this is what I want, and that was taking its toll. So trying to kind of maintain that as well and just be like, okay, this is what I'm looking for, as opposed to demonstrating the poor placement.
Yeah,
So
100%. I
yeah,
am on that.
for me
With
it's a lot of the talking, to be honest. It's my singing usually feels pretty good. It's the talking that gets me.
Well,
'Cause I'm
usually it's because we're animated people.
yeah.
We talk high, we talk low, we're like, and we're expressive. So we're not going to be like, that's so great. You just got, no, like, what the crap? Like we're like throwing stuff out all the time. So yeah.
And I think, with like my family and my friends, like I'm always the one, I'm the clown. I've been the clown since the day I arrived on this earth. That's just who I
Soccer.
am. Yeah. And so I'm like, I think it's expected as well. So if I am lower, people go like, what's wrong? People are so nervous and they're like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying not to talk so much today. So it's a dance.
All right. So one of the other questions that I was thinking of, and this is, I love this about musical theater, is obviously we get to step into different characters. And
Mhm.
sometimes, I mean, you've stepped into some pretty insane characters where you had some people before you, you know,
Yes.
big shoes to fill. How do you authentically keep true to yourself, but also maintain like the development of what that character is? Like, do you have specific examples? Like when you did Glinda and Wicked, like how did you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, I think especially, I mean, Glinda felt the biggest pressure of that, I will say for sure. You'll come out of the stage when people are like, you're my third favorite Glinda. And you're like, thank you so much. Wow.
You're all backhanded right there. I don't know how to respond to that. You're the stepchild. Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, it's just what it is. It's been going on for so long. And I think I got lucky that it has been going on for so long that there have been so many versions of this character by now that like, it's not just me taking a totally different turn from Kristen, right? It's sort of there's been a spectrum of
Yeah.
things. But I saw this quote one time by Meryl Streep that was like, I don't try to be the character. I don't try to act like the character. I try to find myself in the character and what we have in common, and then I go from there. And that always stuck with me. And so I sort of think about how am I this character? How is this person related to me in the way that they think and the way that they, move through the world and stuff like that. And I just really, it's funny that I say that my teacher told me I was not funny, but I trust myself now. I have a confidence, which I think with comedy, especially, and building any character, you have to trust yourself and have confidence in what you're doing, or else it will not work, right? So if you have confidence in yourself and you find yourself in the character, then all you have to do is just trust the material. And if the material, I mean, Wicked is just, it's brilliant. So the material is there for you. And sometimes when I get worked up and add in all my, because again, I'm a clown. So if you let me go too far, it's gonna become a whole thing. I'm like, I'll speak Chinese, I'll do the splits. Like it'll go so far, you know? I would always kind of reel it back in and be like, okay, tell the story.
Yeah.
Just tell the story. That is all you have to do, is tell this story, and it will work, you know? And luckily, I have been in shows where that is the case. I've been in incredible shows where the material just, if you just tell the story, you're going to be okay from a truthful place. But I think the pressure of trying to be Kristen or trying to be one of the, you know, that just doesn't work for me. It just ends up sinking your ship, I think.
Well, it doesn't work for your audience because it's not authentic and it's not honest. And
yeah. And you can sniff that out immediately. You're like, oh, that's just a planned, performed thing, as opposed to someone just reacting in the moment, you know?
So. I found when, so I played Ursula in Little Mermaid, and it was so fun. And I mean, like iconic role. It was so fun.
That is so fun.
It was like this weird thing where I actually came to a workshop back in New York, randomly came in with a friend. She's like, I have somebody I want you to meet. I was like, okay, for the workshop. Went to the workshop, in walks Alan Menken.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sitting there and he's like, who wants to work? And so I had known that Ursula was like coming up, and my friend strategically,
right,
like didn't tell him, but was putting it together. So she's like, Mindy, do you want to come up? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, actually, I'm thinking of auditioning for this show. Do you have any advice? And the advice that he gave, it was so fun. The advice he get, same thing. He's like, you know, she's so iconic. And I just said, like, when you were developing her, like, why the vamp? Why this? And the way he described and you think Disney movie, but like the thought behind her development got me into thinking things a little different.
Yeah.
We actually worked the song. So I actually got to work her song with him. It was like a dream moment for me. I was like living in this like hierarchy bubble. But it ended up transforming, and the way I played her was so different because I had this somewhat of an accent, and a guttural thing where I was like, "Oh, poor child, like I was down here all over," like, and it was amazing just because of how it was, and just felt so real. So yeah, I mean, the pressure of stepping into that. I think when you show authenticity, and I think that's in any field, not even just musical theater, but in any genre of music. When you find that connection and can be honest and authentic, then you're delivering the power to the audience, and they believe you. So.
Totally. And I've been lucky to have collaborators that support that and want that. You know, I had the associate director of Kinky Boots was like, you can't go too far. If you go too far, we will pull you back in. But like, just do what feels right for you with, you know, the comedy of History of Wrong Guys. And I was like, great, amazing. You know, he's like, run with it. A week later, he comes into my dressing room. He's like, so we've gone too far. I was like, okay, great. You know, they'd much rather be given the option to pull you back than just be like, that's all you've got to offer. So I always tell my students, like, in an audition, go for it. You know, they will pull you back if they need you to. And I've been pulled back, but I also think that there's so often we're like, oh, what do I do with my arms? Oh, I don't want to do something too crazy. And I'm like, you gotta make yourself stand out. You gotta bring something to it, or else it's just kind of carbon copy. You know, they don't want to see a Kristen like imitation. You know, maybe some people do, but
I know. I know.
I actually Glinda if they do.
I don't know if I ever told you, but I actually saw you in Glinda on Wicked. I loved it. Yeah. So when I came back, I actually pulled my playbills out, like, because I kept them, and because after we first met and I pulled it out, I'm like, I saw her like that. I saw you in the show, like, and it was beautiful.
Did you see it in New York or on tour?
In New York.
Yeah. It was so fun, and it's been fun. I actually went back on yesterday, 2 days ago.
You just posted that. I just saw that. Yeah.
Was on for Alpha, but she was my Vivian in Legally Blonde, which I did this summer, which
cool.
is also so difficult. I was like, wow, this is I'd never done a show. We put it up in 2.5 weeks. It's like one of those summer, you know, for an 8,000 seat theater. And it was that was like every night everyone was going out, because everyone else, Elle is on stage the whole entire time singing.
You can't do that.
It's basically a pink alphabet is what I call it. It is up there. Um, and they were all, every night they were going out because they were like, this is like summer camp. And I was just in bed with my steamer, every day I'd get up, like go for a run at the gym before rehearsal at 10 a.m. Just kind of like, I was like, I just got to put my head down and get this done. And yeah, afterwards, the last night we all had fun because I was like, okay, I'm good.
There it
We
is.
did it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I follow you and seeing it. And it was so great to see it. Like I can't, I mean, that's like a perfect role for you.
It was, it had been a dream for so long. And I feel like when I got out there, I was like, if I've been running my mouth around New York City being like, this is my dream role, I got to do a good job. So I had to, we put a
Step
lot
it
of work,
up.
but yeah, but it was, yeah, a total dream.
Power
I don't know if
manifestation.
I'd want to do it 8 times a week.
Yeah, that would be a lot.
Yeah.
That would be a
So,
lot. So,
mhm.
let's go back to coaching for a minute. So,
Yeah.
I always say knowledge is power, education is power, leveling up. Where do you find inspiration, or like who do you follow, or like where do you find inspiration to just kind of keep leveling up that game or getting your education?
For my
For
coaching.
coaching. Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, you, Dr. Gupta, like all these people that I've sort of used as mentors along the way, figuring out my studio. I find a lot of inspiration from just listening to singers that I think are incredible and like trying as I listen to them, picturing where they're placing that sound and what vowels they're on and how they're achieving that and what little tips and tricks they're actually using. And it's been so interesting going back to a lot of this music, like Adam's Family, for example. When I was a kid, I thought it was all like pulled was all a chest belt. I thought it was all like pulled, 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 this huge sound. And you go back and you listen, and Krista Rodriguez is like, as I'm pulled in a new, like it is like a completely different placement in general of the song. And so I love like finding those things and hearing those things and then bringing them to my students and making it apparent to them so that they go, oh, like all this time I thought I had to push and it had to be this big sound, and that's literally not what it is. There's some disconnect there. Obviously also it's a recording studio and there are
Yeah.
things.
I actually just recorded a reel on that about how you need to go back and listen to the nuances. And that's why your voice sounds different live versus recording, because of these different levels
Totally.
and,
Yeah.
trying to utilize all of
And
that.
like coaching myself through stuff too, like all the songs that singers bring in, I'm like, okay, now where would I put that in my voice? How do I work through that? Every time I have a sound check, I record it and then I listen back and I'm like, ooh, I want a straight tone on that. And then I'm going to build, like I get very technical about it now. Whereas I think in the past, I was much more just kind of like, oh, this is what I got, And now I'm like, oh, I'm so in there under the hood of the car with so many different voices that I do the same to my own. So I think I get a lot of inspiration just from listening, yeah, to like the Kelly O'Hara's, the Linda Edders, the, even Celine. I mean, there was a lot of Celine listening to during Titanic, and just Broadway cast recordings in general, just to hear where people are putting things and being like, oh, oh, they weren't trying that hard. Work smart, not hard, actually, in this studio. So
Uh, Clearly. Is there a is there a vocal concept that you find that you're always addressing in your studio that people might have a misunderstanding on?
a lot of jaw, obviously. I mean, the jaw is, I always say, I'm like, this is such a weird analogy that I've said, and every time I'm like, why does my brain work this way? But I like picture the jaws of my students like sitting in a like AA meeting, kind of being like, they don't need us anymore. Because I'm like, we don't need her in this situation, right? And it's just working on that constantly. Also a lot of just the kind of cry, pouty sound in the front of the face, as opposed to like the slamming of the chords in the back. And using I always explain it as like a tube in front of my face so that we're getting in that pocket as opposed to like coming from the back placement. I'd say that's a lot of what I do. Just because like musical theater belting, we just get so, I feel like students get so lost with it because they feel like, oh, that's not my voice, or I can't do that. And I'm like, you can do it. Like, just say it like a whiny pouty baby. Okay, now try it. And then all of a sudden the sound comes out and they're like, wait, what?
What happened? Yeah.
Yeah, like we're all faking it till we make it. But yeah, I think a lot of that is probably the main thing. Because like I said, I get a lot of like classical crossover that they just sort of don't have never explored that pocket
Yeah.
before.
Well, it's such
Um,
an interesting world too, and that's why for people who are trying to do classical crossover, it's important to find a coach that I think can demonstrate the classical crossover correctly because we
yes.
mimic. And I think there's a lot of people that don't know how to do it correctly. And that's where we end up into these like sketchy, weird,
And it's
areas.
also so much I've learned is communication. Like I think often I have students that are in programs, musical theater programs, very prestigious musical theater programs, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, "So my teacher said I'm not allowed to belt." And I'm like, "Okay, what did they actually say? What was the actual thing they said?" And then I almost translate it for them. And
Mhm.
then we do, we work on it. And then they go back to their coach, and their coach is like, "Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted." And I'm like, if you had taken that little seed that you extracted from that conversation of I'm not allowed to belt ever,
Yep.
you head down a path of like destruction. That sounds so like
Dun,
intense,
dun,
but
dun. Yeah.
it starts to spiral. And then a lot of times I'm like getting students who have gotten so mixed up about because it wasn't communicated in the right way, their brain didn't understand. So I always start every first lesson by being like, I'm going to throw a lot at you. This is to see what sticks. This is to see what you pick up on, what works for you. If you have any question, ask me. Like, I want you to understand it. And if I'm explaining it in a way that doesn't really work with your brain, because we all have different learning styles, then tell me and we'll go a different way. Because I just think that's so much a part of it too. Like, you obviously can't see your vocal cords. So it's a lot of feeling and knowing, like navigating it mentally, really,
Yeah.
at a certain point. So
That was a
yeah.
great segue into the next
Oh,
question
perfect.
because how do you navigate being in theater where you have to have different emotions on stage and the crying and all of that? Do you have tricks or tools with how to keep vocal control when you are having an emotional intensity in whatever that delivery is?
Ooh, ooh, that was a great question.
I mean, I know what I use, but I'm not going to tell you yet. I want to see what you
What I use to maintain control in
Yeah,
the
like so if you're working a song, so and you had to cry, like get that connection, get that cry without breaking or falling apart. Like Leah
yes,
Salonga for me is like prime example of someone who
right.
can show that emotional context, like going through like her Miss Saigon stuff, like hello, stab, heart. But like how do you work that? Like when you have a role that's like that.
I mean, well, I am in general, I'm not like, hey, like there are moments in songs with my students that I'll be like, I don't want this to be pretty. I don't want this to sound exact, right? When your voice cracks a little, when your voice breaks, like Ben Platt in Words Fail from Dear Evan
Oh,
Hansen, his
kills.
voice cracks is like that's the best part, right? So I'm like, I don't want you to be so concerned about the technique at a certain point that you can't get there emotionally, right? The goal is
Yeah.
to train you so that the technique is just ingrained in you, and then you can just let it all go in the room and know that your voice is going to be there for you. I mean, a lot of it is for me is just staying on the shelf and not letting yourself get dropping down too far where then it to rev back up that machine, it's
Yeah.
difficult. So I guess a lifted placement, I would say, but I don't know. I mean, because I cry a lot. I cry a lot when I'm singing. Sometimes with more success than others. But I think it's like allowing myself to go there and then knowing how to get back on the
Yeah.
bike.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what I was gonna say with mine too, is that we're bust through the door, so you know how far you can get, have
right,
the ugly cry or whatever.
right,
So we have the reference of how to get there and then pull yourself back to the door. So you
right.
know that we have to like nudge it so we can connect it, but we're not busting through it so you fall apart on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And just
And I
find
think
whatever that context is.
yes, exactly. But letting yourself go there too, because I do think a lot of times we're like, you know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna crack. I'm gonna crack. I talk about cracking all the time because I'm like, we're all so scared of cracking that we end up cracking
Yeah.
because you're tightening everything and it's fight or flight, right? Like if you just got to release that, and I guarantee you won't crack. Like,
Yep.
so well, sometimes
Yeah.
my students will get to a place where they're singing, they sound insane. I'm like, wow, 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 and they're like, yeah, but I'm not belting anymore, and I'm like, why? Because it doesn't hurt, because it's not heavy. Like now we're at the phase where you have to trust yourself. And I know that's the hardest part, but you have to do that on your own. Like you have to trust yourself and trust me that I won't let you do something that sounds,
They're
the
weird.
whiskey can't die. I would never let you leave sounding like that.
You're like, time's up, get out. See ya.
Bye.
All right, last question, and
Okay.
forget it's good. It's all voice straw now. So tell me, how has voice straw, cup straw, all of that changed? Has it changed the way you teach? Has it changed the way
It's
your voice
changed
has been, or
everything.
like what?
Like
Tell me.
your number one disciple. The disciple of the straw. I am fully in. I have all my students bring a straw for their first lesson, and we get into it, and we talk about it. And I find that a lot of them do not know what it's doing or what is happening, right? And so I'm like, here's a little brief overview. If you want more information, I did this, IG live with Mindy back in the day, with all the extra information, because I'm the type of person, and hence why I slid into your DMs, was I'm not going to teach something unless I know everything about it, or unless I use it myself, right? As a singer. That's just how I work. So it's definitely changed everything. I mean, I've been so much more vocally healthy, I guess, like even getting through the 10 months of teaching and singing Celine Dion for 8 shows a week,
Yeah.
I was able to do it. And I really think the straw was a huge part of that. And just also kickstarting my warm up routine, getting used to like, I just straw first thing in the morning. And then it's like everything else, then I'll do kind of other light warm ups just on any given day, even if I don't have any performing to do that night. So for the maintenance of it all, it has really, really, really helped. Tremendously. And the cups are so great so that I'm not pushing.
Love it.
Sometimes I get excited and I push a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it's funny. I bring it with me obviously everywhere. And I can't even tell you the number of Broadway performers that I'm doing gigs with or concerts with or shows with. And they're like, wait, okay, will you like tell me about it? And I'm like, oh, will I tell you about it? Like, I want
Girl,
everyone to be
let
using
me
it.
open up my bag.
It feels like this, like not secret, but it feels like this, it's kind of the only thing we have as vocalists to help us. And I don't understand why not everyone is using it, or
Yeah.
part of it, because the science is there and it really truly helps. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love it. Well, I love and adore you. You know this. I am
Thank
glad to have you
you.
on my disciple bandwagon.
Oh my God, I'm here. I'm out here singing the praises.
Together. And I just appreciate you talking voice nerd stuff and all of that. And I love and adore you. Like I feel like
Really all day, every day.
I know, I feel like we're best friends.
You have.
Going through, and if there's ever anything I can do for you, as always, just let me know.
You're the best.
But no, you're the best, and I just wish you the best of luck this year, and have fun with the wedding and shows and whatever little things you have in your pocket and coaching and
It's
just
fun. It's
spreading
fun
joy,
to be
man.
like, again, it's like this life that we lead, everything can change in an instant. So it's just fun to sort of be open to the universe. And I just feel like it's a good year. I feel like last year was a grear year, but I feel like this year's a great year too.
I
So.
can't wait to see what's on the horizon. So, all right, Miss Carrie St. Louis. Thank you for joining us today.
Of course, thank you.
How can people find you or follow you?
They can find me at Carrie St. Louis or at the Carrie St. Louis studio. So either one of those.
Either way, we got you.
I keep the studio more for my vocal, studio. And then at Carrie St. Louis for all the other fun things. Basically pictures of my dog. Yeah.
Even better.